I think it's time for a little change of pace here on the IGSL. There we go. After almost 2 years of seeing the words funding successful on Kickstarter twice, Indie Game the Movie has been unleashed on tour, and Film Fest, and now on the interwebs. Many fans, such as myself, who will be similarly excited about new DLC for Dungeons of Dreadmore, very much eagerly awaited the film's release. But something kind of curious happened with Indie Game the Movie. Outside of indie gaming, it garnered a lot of mainstream attention and almost universal praise. Does it live up to that kind of hype? Let's find out. The film was produced, edited, directed, shot, and I assumed catered by Canadian filmmakers James Swartzky and Lisanne Pachot through Blinkworks Media. The story behind the film actually began at GDC 2009 when the filmmakers attended the event to cover it for an industry association back in Winnipeg. While at the event, they kept getting caught up with the Indie Games Summit and meeting all the different independent developers there.
It just seemed so interesting to see these people and hear these people talk about their games and open up about their games, and it became really clear really quickly at how personal these games are to these people. And so when they're talking about their game, they're talking about themselves, it seemed.
After the event, they went back to Winnipeg and filmed a short segment with Alec Boloka, the developer behind games like Aquaria, Paper Moon, and the upcoming Marion. After posting it online, it generated a nice amount of buzz, which led to the idea of possibly making more videos about it. They then talked to Edmund McMillan and Tommy Reffiness, aka Team Meat, and filmed them discussing their work and their games. This prompted James and Lisanne to release a Kickstarter for the project on May 18, 2010. The Kickstarter was a big hit with an initial goal of $15,000, and it made just a little above that within the first 48 hours.
I think we didn't sleep for 4 days after that. I like the response and the email and the Twitter, and it was just, I think it was life-changing for us, the kind of response that we got.
For a number of months after that, the filmmakers went all over North America, interviewing a large range of developers and figures from around the indie scene. When they gathered all their footage, they formed a second Kickstarter to help fine-tuning the film, getting color corrected, mixing the audio, yada yada yada, this time raising over $71,000 with a completed trailer. After the movie was finished with all that nice shiny polish all over it, the filmmakers then went on tour, starting at the Sundance Film Festival, where it received praise from various critics and even won Best Editing in the Sundance World Cinema Documentary Competition. It even went on to be praised by other filmmakers at the fest, such as Kevin Smith of Clerks and Chasing Amy fame, Lee Unkrich of Pixar and Toy Story credit, and Brad Bird of The Iron Giant and The Incredibles. Nice job, guys. After some time on the road, going to various screenings and film festivals, the movie went on to win almost universal praise from both audiences and critics, receiving a 96% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Because, Metacritic's numbers don't lie, right? Well, to be more accurate, instead of relying on a number, what they wrote is actually very praising towards the film. As of right now, the film has been made available on digital download, and James and Lisanne, I'm guessing they're gonna spend a few months recharging their batteries. I don't blame you. The film itself mainly centers around 3 stories. Jonathan Blow on creating Braid and recalling the perception the game had on the community, Team Meat developing and releasing the Xbox version of Super Meat Boy, and the development of Fez by Polytron developer Phil Fish, who looks like a young Carl Fredricksen. Haha, try unseeing that! The documentary follows the developers as they explain each of their projects, how they went about making their games, and their personal lives relating with family, friends, and other game makers. The central theme of the film, right off the bat, is that these games are ultimately very personal to their respective game makers. When the film talks about their histories and their stories growing up and things happening in their lives right now, it shows how the game makers are able to express their feelings, their insecurities, and the things happening around them through their games. The film does a great job of going into design philosophy 101 with all these games, but for the most part, it focuses on the more human aspects of it. The movie never feels like a bunch of programmers talking for about an hour and a half about computer coding. It goes for a much more universal take on making games that gamers and non-gamers can certainly relate to.
Ether was kind of based around my niece. She kind of reminded me of me because she didn't really seem to like to play with other kids, and she liked to just do things by herself and explore by herself, and she was very imaginative and she really liked monsters, so that whole thing brought me back to when I was little, and I thought, how cool would it be to make a game that could put other people inside my mind when I was like 5, 6, 7, and that was Ether.
The film also does a great job of showing the demanding process of creating an Xbox Live game, along with the pressure and isolation it takes. And since all the developers in this film don't have the luxury of different departments that are in charge of marketing, technical side, or team of programmers, it's a hell of a lot more hard. I've heard the statistic that if you're in the mainstream development side, you work about 60 hours a week, but if you go indie, it's about 100 hours a week, and the film and everything displayed here definitely supports that saying. Everything's on their shoulders, and that means going away from family, going away from friends, and all for something that the internet may not care about at all. To borrow a saying from Million Dollar Baby, it's a dream that nobody sees but them.
I'm on the line, me, like my name, my career. If this fails, like, I don't think I'll work in games again.
But don't worry, the film isn't a complete downer of cynicism and negativity. There are moments of laughter, passion, and yes, even tears. I don't really think it's a spoiler to anybody about how Super Meat Boy was a big success, but saying how the film depicts that reaction to that success would be a spoiler. I won't say a whole lot here, but there's a moment between Edmund and his wife Daniela late in the film. At the Santa Cruz premiere, it rang thunderous applause. And if you're watching it at home, I wouldn't be surprised if it got a little dusty in the room. I hope you guys have some Kleenex left after playing To the Moon. Everything else that happens in the film, I'm gonna leave for the surprise for you to watch. But there's a number of great things from a filmmaking aspect that Indie Game the Movie really gets right. First, let's talk about the camera work. The film was completely shot with a Kodak 5D Mark II camera. The whole film looks slick and stylistic, showing the competent instincts as documentary filmmakers on James Lazan's part. To get minorly technical, a piece of camera equipment they used was a Castellaire Pocket Dolly, or a glide track as the website describes. When mounted to a tripod, it acts as a mini dolly that you can move your camera to create a nice smooth dolly left and right, and it's portable! This is a piece of equipment that the film uses a lot, and it's a key part to the whole film's aesthetic style. Now take a look at this frame of Edmund sitting at his computer. Looks fine, right? The lighting's okay, it's got a nice little composition with the TV screen on the right, and Edmund sitting at his table slightly unkept. I can certainly relate with that. Now take a look at what the film does. Notice how it slowly dollies from the TV over to Edmund sitting at his desk. It's a really subtle movement that draws your attention from the screen to Edmund. It looks really slick and professional instead of it being just a boring static shot. Also, it's not just a style for the sake of style shot with the way it's edited in the film. The TV works symbolically. It's a constant reminder to Edmund to get the game finished so that anybody can play it on the TV. It's almost overbearing on him as it dominates a third of the screen, and it relates to the audience what's going on with him in terms of pressure. There's a lot of great little moments like this to help express what's happening on screen. There's also a lot of great imagery that comes to mind after watching the film. Jonathan Blow silhouetted against San Francisco, the sun setting under the Santa Cruz Pier, the white background outside of PAX East. For a movie that on its surface is about a bunch of talking heads talking about making computer games, it's a pretty good looking little motion picture. In terms of the editing, it has an amazing sense of flow and an almost dreamlike atmosphere. It really lends itself to the help of that great soundtrack by Jim Guthrie. Jim's most well known amongst the indie gaming community as providing the soundtrack for Super Brothers, Sword, and Sorcery. And if you've ever heard that soundtrack, you can tell Jim's signature style certainly has its touch here. While the soundtrack is mostly MIDI-based, it uses a combination of guitar, bass, drums, ukulele, piano, and a few more instruments. When I contacted Jim about his soundtrack, he describes that he wanted to try to create music that was a mix of synthetic and organic. He wanted the sounds that would both speak to gaming culture and to the people making games. The soundtrack gives a wide range of emotions. Sometimes it's haunting, smooth, ambitious, or just hanging out. It's mostly there to help express the emotions of what's going on with the characters. It's the kind of thing that goes much more of an ambiotic take on it. And even if you listen a little closely to some of the music, you can hear little hints towards Super Meat Boy and Fez. But back to the editing. It does a great job of balancing the different storylines and arcs between Team Meat and Phil. It flows at a great pace and landing just the right beats between the different characters while showing off a really well-polished motion graphics design for the film. It adds great personality to the film, it helps explain to non-gamers how the games are made, and well, it's just really neat to watch. And with that, it's time for a fun factoid! In order to capture the Street Fighter footage for when Tommy Raffinez talks about Control, it took filmmaker James Swartzky about 6 hours to capture that footage since he didn't have access to a home console and only his computer. While on the road, he had to play through the entire game with Ken only using his keyboard and no controller. The irony of this fact is that it didn't even make it into the final film. The video of Tommy talking about it is only available on their website. Now that's dedication. But one last point I want to make about the editing. We can have a conversation about flow and how all the scenes go by really fast and it never really feels like you're watching an hour and a half long. But the thing I love most about the editing is how it really helps add subtext to everything that's going on. One of my favorite scenes in the film from an editing standpoint involves Jonathan Blow discussing the community's reaction to Break. I'm not going to spoil exactly what happens, but it takes a video clip that on its surface is very ironic and kind of hilarious and turns it into a great storytelling tool. It's smart filmmaking that really reached the next level. So the film is well crafted, and it does a great job of explaining their stories and going through all their troubles and all their philosophies. However, watching it for the first time, and they've probably heard this online a few times, there was a bit of a nagging little criticism that I can think of. And that would be the film's title, Indie Game the Movie. You see, how the film was marketed and kickstarted in the beginning is that we would see all sorts of different developers from North America talk about their games and their passions. And while the film does feature an intro to the indie scene, showing off quite a few games and what they're all about, with a nice little cameo from somebody I've featured on this show, the film mainly focuses on 3 North American games from developers by 4 white males who are very well known amongst the indie scene. I feel like the filmmakers kind of put themselves into a corner with their Kickstarter and that marketing. It would have been almost impossible to capture all of what indie gaming is with all the different developers all over the world in an hour-and-a-half documentary. If the film had been called Super Meat Boy, Fez, and the Attack of the Facial Hair, I probably wouldn't be complaining about it. Or on retrospect, maybe I would. But it's called Indie Game the Movie, and for something called that, it only shows a very small portion of what it is. But upon thinking more about it, in a way I'm happy they didn't. The website boasts that they shot over 300 hours of assorted footage. If they did try to capture everything and every little moment from all the developers, it'd be boring, it'd be dull, it'd be pretentious, nobody would watch it, it would be overlooked, it would be funny. The film touches on things I'm sure are very universal when it comes to making a commercial indie game. Enormous pressure, uncertainty, isolation. These are things I can imagine anyone making a full-time game by themselves is going through. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if anybody watching this video was coding at the same time listening to me. Like you! Pay attention! What Indie Game the Movie does really well is tell the story of these 4 developers from their point of view. It doesn't show all of what indie development is, but it definitely shows what a lot of indie developers go through. A kind of personal hell in order to create something truly unique and personal to them. And what's more indie than that? So now that you may have a little bit of interest in Indie Game the Movie, you have several options in order to legally download and watch the film. You can find all the information and where you can get the different versions, and even where you can rent the film over at indiegamethemovie.com. It also has the option to pre-order DVDs, and even the special edition DVDs featuring a lot of the interviews that weren't used in the final film. And some of those extra interviews, including Derek Yu and Ali Paloka, are available to watch right on the website for free. So what are my final thoughts on this little Kickstarter wonder project? Well, I dug it.
It's awesome.
The film works with its complete competence and understanding of the craft of filmmaking. It's a great treat for me as an indie gaming fan to hear developers who I look up to talking about their games. It demonstrates to non-gamers just how much stress and hard labor goes into making these games, but ultimately it works on a human level. It's an underdog story of an artist's struggle trying to find a place in a new renaissance of indie development. This is the little movie that could about the little companies that could. And with all that extra footage that they've gathered, I'm really hoping this isn't the last we see of Indie Game the Movie. Also, James Ilizan, thanks for this really quick shot. I couldn't be more proud to have that in this wonderful film. I've heard that if you suggest a great indie game at my email address, addatworkproductions@yahoo.com, some have reached pure enlightenment. Thanks as always for watching. Now take a second to look at these pretty logos.
What we can, what's the matter?